Hi, everybody, this is Dr. Bhatia, and welcome back to IMG Marvels. I know we've been gone for a very long time, but I'm back, and this is a much requested, very long awaited video that I hope you guys will find helpful. As you can see, this video is an hour long. So it did take me a while to edit this, but it was very, very kindly recorded for us by Dr. Raja Tiwari, who was a trust grade who worked at Leicester. And this is a very, very comprehensive guide on what trust grade jobs are, how to apply to them, what the differences between trust grade and FY2 jobs are. And I will be making another video about the differences between FY2 standalone and trust grade jobs. Feel free to listen to this at 1.25 or 1.5 speed on YouTube, depending on how comfortable you are with the topic and how much you already know. Leave all your questions down in the comments. I've got loads of friends here at Leicester who are trust grades, so I will be able to help you and ask them questions and reply. And if you've got any other video requests, please leave them down in the comments. I do wish to make a lot of videos about my F1 and F2 jobs and my experience and how we manage things. So if you have any questions about that as well, leave them in the comments, and I will leave you in the very capable hands of Dr. Raja. Enjoy.
So I guess I'll start with introducing myself first. My name is Raja. I graduated from RCSI Bahrain in 2016. From 2016 to 2017, I did a internship at King Hamad University Hospital for a year. That ended in 2017, and from 2017 to 2019, I did a master's degree in public health, specifically in health policy and management at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. Um, During the last year of my master's, I basically did the PLAB 1 and PLAB 2, and after that, I started applying for training and non-training positions within the NHS for postgraduate medical training. Um, I'm currently a trust grade doctor in a non-training position at the University Hospitals of Leicester NHS Trust. And I think so. While I was applying for jobs, I started a blog called IMG Day by Day, which basically gave an overview of my experience applying for postgraduate medical training. I feel like it's fairly straightforward to get both those types of positions in the UK, and I think right now, especially with the situation when it comes to immigration and things like that, there's no better time to come to the UK, and there are a few reasons for this. So the first is PLAB 1 and PLAB 2, the exams that you have to do um, before you can come work here is relatively straightforward. Second is there are lots of jobs. So there are, and we'll talk about this later as well, there are training and non-training jobs, but there are lots and lots of jobs. There are lots of vacancies in the NHS in my experience, both within training and non-training positions. And given the amount of jobs available, it even though it might take a little bit of time, I think in terms of passing the exams and applying for jobs, I think given the number of jobs available, it it's a place you'll end up finding a job. It might just take a little bit of time. Third thing is the familiarity with getting a job. If you have people that you know, and I know lots of people from my year who are here. There are lots of people to help or guide in terms of how exactly one would want to get a job. So, um, and the last thing I guess would be training options. So I think this one is a little bit subjective, but in my opinion at least, there's more scope in terms of what you want to do. Like for example, for me, if I wanted to go to North America, for example, and practice medicine there are only certain specialties that are more friendly to IMDs, especially in the US. So internal medicine, family medicine, things like that. But things such as, anesthesia or emergency medicine, the kind of things that I'm interested in, it's just a lot harder if you're not a US citizen or if you're not a Canadian citizen to get into those kind of specialties. But in the UK, there are lots of IMGs that have gotten into um, quote unquote quote unquote competitive specialties like anesthesia, emergency medicine, radiology, things like that. I think some of this is subjective, um, so I would definitely take it with a pinch of salt. So I'm going to give like a very quick overview of how medical training, postgraduate medical training in the UK works. So essentially, you graduate medical school, and then you have to do the foundation program. Now, everyone has to do this program. You can't. It doesn't matter what specialty you want to go to, but you do the foundation program. That's 2 years, so foundation year one and foundation year two. Once you finish that, you get a certificate saying, you're ready for entering specialty training, and then you apply for example, if you want to do internal medicine training, you apply for IMT, which is internal medicine training, and that lasts for 4 years. At the end of that, say I want to become a cardiologist. Once I finish internal medicine training, I apply for cardiology ST3 training, which is another 4 to 5 years. And at the end of that, you become a consultant cardiologist. So basically, that's kind of an overview of how postgraduate medical training in the UK works. Now, I think everyone wants to, like, for example, everyone wants to enter a training program, get specialized, and take whatever path they want to take within being a doctor. So, um, basically, to enter um, core training or residency, if you want to use the North American term for it, you need to have two things in the UK. You need to have 24 months of clinical experience, and you need to have a certificate saying that you are at a level that allows, at a clinical, educational, professional level that allows you to enter specialty training. So you need those two things. You need 24 months of total clinical experience, and you need a certificate saying you have met all the standards required for someone to enter specialty training. So basically, in my situation, I had already had 12 months of experience with my Bahrain internship, and I didn't have a form that certifies that I'm ready to enter specialty training. So when I passed my PLAB 1 and PLAB 2, given that I'd already done 1 year of internship and had 12 months of clinical experience, I applied for full registration with the General Medical Council. Um, and therefore, when I was looking for jobs, my criteria was basically this: that I need 12 months of clinical experience, and I need a job that lets me get the certificate signed off saying that I can enter specialty training. It's called the CREST form, CREST, and it's, I think, the certificate for readiness to enter specialty training. So CREST, that's an acronym for what the form is. So when I was applying for jobs, those were the two basic criteria that needed to be met for all the jobs that I was applying for. So I guess the next question would be, what jobs do you look for to get that criteria to A, get the 12 months of clinical experience, and B, get a form signed off saying that you're ready to enter specialty training? So just to reiterate, before to start any sort of training program, whether that be internal medicine training, surgical training, radiology training, whatever, you need 24 months total clinical experience, and you need a certificate or a document that tells people that you are ready to enter specialty training. Now, I needed 12 months of clinical experience because I already had 12 months from Bahrain, and I also, of course, needed that form. So, for me, the kinds of the jobs that are available to me were, and the jobs that are available to everyone would be either a training job to get that 12 months of experience and that certificate, or a non-training job to get that training experience and get that certificate. Um, and there are lots of different kinds of jobs in the UK, and I think there's a lot of confusion as to, what job do you go for? Do you go for a training job, non-training job, and what kind of difference that makes? Um, so the first training program that's available to me is available to me to get that 12 months of clinical experience and getting a certificate that basically tells people that I'm ready to apply for specialty training, is the Foundation Year 2 standalone program. So that I mentioned previously that for someone entering after graduating medical school, UK medical graduates do, or all medical graduates do, Foundation Year 1 and then Foundation Year 2. These are the foundation years, and then after they're finished with foundation year 2, they get a certificate saying, you're ready to apply for specialty training. So foundation year 2 standalone um, program, I think the name is basically a giveaway, is that second year of the foundation years. So they're called F2 posts, and they basically last for a year. And at the end of that year, you get a certificate called the Foundation Program Certificate of Competence, FPCC, that makes you eligible to apply for these uh, residency positions or specialty training, such as internal medicine training and things like that. Now, the Foundation Year 2 posts, like a lot of training programs, or almost all training programs, they start in August of every year. So August 2020, August 2021. The applications open usually in January of that year. So for the 2021 intake, they would open in January or February of 2021. And then usually there's an eligibility criteria. Um, Most people, as long as you've passed your PLAB 1 and are in the process of passing your PLAB 2, you meet the eligibility criteria. So for example, I met the eligibility criteria and I had no problems applying for the post. Once you're deemed eligible, there's an interview which is around 20 minutes long. It's fairly straightforward. So usually you'll just go through your CV, and there'll usually be an ethical scenario, a clinical scenario, and you have to basically um, answer those questions. It lasts for around 20 minutes or so, and then you get feedback of that interview as well. Um, so that's the first program, the Foundation Year 2 Standalone program. It lasts for a year, starts every August. Now, it's a training program, so everyone is familiar with um, what's expected of F2 trainees and what the program is. So no matter where you go, there's a familiarity with or a consistency in what kind of support you get. Um, they also have dedicated time for teaching. So during the week, for example, you'll have F2 teaching, so you won't have your clinical responsibilities during that time, and you'd be allowed to go, I don't know, wherever they do the teaching for them. So, for example, in my department, when the F2 trainees have teaching, they usually are excused from clinical duties, and they can, because of COVID, they can watch it online, but usually they would have to go, I don't know, in one of the departments for their teaching. So you have some um, time where you don't have your clinical responsibilities, where you have this teaching time, dedicated teaching time, so to speak. And also within that one year, um, you do 3 rotations. You do 4 months of 3 rotations. So, for example, you can do 4 months of GP, 4 months of gastroenterology, and 4 months of general surgery. So that that's basically how the year is divided into. As to the application process, I mentioned that so if the intake is in August 2021, the application process starts in January or February of that year. So January and February 2021 is when the applications for August 2021 will be due, or well, that's when you'll be able to start the application. As to where you apply, so there's a website called Oriel, so ORIEL. If you Google that, it will take you to the website where you apply for the training program. And also, if you Google Foundation Year 2 standalone program, it'll take you to the website about the standalone standalone jobs, and also the timeline and the kind of things you need to be eligible and things like that. I wouldn't worry too much about the eligibility criteria as long as you have passed your PLAB 1 and are in the process of doing your PLAB 2, you will be eligible and you will be able to apply. I mentioned that for Foundation Year 2 standalone programs, it's a year and you have 3 different rotations. I think a natural question to be asked is, can you choose what rotations you get? And you can choose them in a sense. So When you apply, um, when you apply and then you finish your interview and then you are deemed after you do those two things, you will be able to rank um, your preferences. So, for example, in my case, after I finished my interview, I then had around 300 positions, and then within the 300 positions, you kind of rank what position you want, and it could be based on the rotations or the location, because obviously these are all around England and Wales and Northern Ireland, basically all around the UK. So it will tell you when it's called preferencing window. So during that time, you'll be preferencing your ranking list based on what you want to do. Like, so I based my ranking list basically completely on the rotations because I didn't really care where I worked as long as the rotations I was working in were things I enjoyed. And what rotation you get and what position you get is dependent on your rank. So once you finish the eligibility criteria and once you finish the interview, you get a rank, and so that rank can be any rank basically, depending on the number of applicants, and then they have this algorithm that figures out what position, like what rotations you'll be getting based on your rank. Um, so that's basically how the F2 standalone program works. And at the end of your F2 standalone, you get a certificate called the Foundation Program Certificate of Competence, the FPCC. Um, and so you don't have to get the certificate signed off. I mean, you get it signed off as long as you pass all the assessments that go on during the year. Meetings with your supervisors and things like that. So as long as you satisfy the requirements, you will get it signed off, and you'll be able to basically enter specialty training at the end of your F2 year, so to speak. And just to add, like I forgot to mention this earlier, but I kind of mentioned it, is that so there are literally every kind of rotation imaginable within these F2 standalone posts. It's just a question of you looking at these rotations and figuring out which ones you want. So, for example, when I was ranking them, I really did not want any surgical posts because, I knew I was never going to do surgery as a career. So I ranked those posts, but I ranked them really low within my ranking list. So in terms of what kind of specialties you do, it really depends on one, what your rank is, and two, um, how you've preferenced the number of rotations within the posts. And just to give like a sense of how many posts there are, so I think I ranked 300 or so posts, which I mean it's quite a task to go through like 300 different posts and try and figure out which ones you want. But depending on your own circumstances, you might rank them either based on their location or based on the rotations within the program for me. So that's basically the first training program, the F2 standalone training program, which you should go check the eligibility criteria, which you should be able to meet. I think it's mostly passing your PLAB 1 and on your way to doing your PLAB 2 and making sure your English language requirements are met. So that's the training program. The second is the non-training program, which is basically what I'm doing right now um, at the University Hospitals of Leicester. So non-training programs are basically like the word says, they're not a structured training program. They'll be they will be equivalent to training jobs. So it'll be an FY1 non-training program or FY2 non-training job. They won't be within a structured training program, but they'll have the same requirements and duties um, of an individual that is a trainee. So you'll have the same rota as F2 trainees. So for example, I have the same rota as F2 trainees. I have the same duties and responsibilities while I'm at work as F2 trainees because my non-training program is at an F2 level. And you can have non-training jobs at basically any level in the UK. I have seen some, there are some non-training F1 programs, FY1 programs, Foundation Year 1 programs, but the majority you will see are from FY2 to more senior levels. So, as a registrar and things like that. But basically, these non-training programs are not within a training structure, and they usually correspond to some level within trainees. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, mine is a F2 non-training position. So, because I'm an F2 non-training position, my responsibilities in the hospital are the same as an F2 trainee. So, um, but they're not the same. But for example, if I wasn't at F2 level, say for example my non-training job was at a registrar level, so my responsibilities and rota would be the registrar level rota. But obviously, because I haven't worked for that long, my um, non-training post is an F2 non-training post. So it's in the same rota, it has the same duties and responsibilities as a someone who's in the foundation year 2 of their career. But it's important to sort of realize that my objective within this non-training program is same as it is within my if I were doing the F2 standalone program. It's to get 12 months of clinical experience, and it's also to get a certificate signed off saying I'm ready for specialty training. So, um, yeah, the objectives, whether you're in a training program or non-training program, basically are the same. So far, like they've sounded fairly similar, your F2 standalone program or the non-training F2 post that I am in. But, there are definitely differences between the two. For example, I'll just go through some of the differences and things to keep in mind when you're applying for when you're trying to decide which one you want. Do you want a training program or a non-training program? So the biggest advantage for non-training jobs, like the one I'm in, is the fact that they are advertised all year, and you're also able to start in any month or in any month of the year. So the F2 standalone program I talked about, that only starts in August of every single year, whereas these non-training posts, they're rolling applications. So all you have to do is apply, and then if you get the job, you can basically start in a couple of months. So, for example, I got my GMC registration in November, and I applied for the F2 standalone post, but that would start in, August of the next year. So I didn't really want to wait from November to August to start a job. I wanted to start basically as soon as possible. So, um, for me, it was an advantage that these non-training programs are advertised all year round because, you can, unless it really depends on what your personal circumstances, right? Unless you're okay with waiting, you might be someone who's totally okay with waiting for that long. You might be finishing something else or doing something else during that time. So the biggest difference, one, is the fact that you can join non-training programs literally at any point in the year. And whereas F2 standalone is only basically in August. Um, so the second big thing is when you apply for these non-training posts, you know exactly what you're applying for. Now, what do I mean by that? So, um, non-training posts, when they're advertised. They'll tell you exactly what they want. So, for example, or exactly what rotations you'll be doing. So, for example, you could have 1 year within all the different medical specialties changing every 3 months. So, for example, you could have respiratory medicine, cardiology, things like that. Or, if you're interested in surgery, you might have 1 year of surgery. Or if you're interested in, um, say, emergency medicine, it will be 1 year in emergency medicine. And there are lots of, in all the ads, and I'll tell you like where you find the jobs and stuff. In all the adverts for these jobs, it'll tell you exactly what rotations you'll be in, and so you know exactly what you're applying for, and you can decide what you're applying for. You don't apply for things that you don't want. So, for example, I didn't apply. The only jobs I applied for were non-training jobs, were medicine jobs and emergency medicine jobs, because I knew that's basically what I want to do. So I applied for those two, and I didn't apply for any surgical jobs, any obstetrics and gynecology jobs, any peds jobs, because I knew that's not something that I had any interest in doing. So the second thing is um, that you basically know what you're applying for. And usually these jobs are, when you apply for them, it will tell you how long the contract length is. I mentioned F2 standalone is for a year, but these non-training jobs can be, 6 months to a year. And even if they're longer than that, so for example, even if they're 2 years, it's not like you have to stay there for 2 years. You can decide to leave your non-training job, as long as you give your NHS trust enough notice, and the notice period will depend on what your contract is. So, it's usually 1 and 2 months. So as long as you let them know within 1 or 2 months that you want to leave, you can leave that post. And I guess the next two things I'd talk about is the eligibility for applying for F2 non-training F2 posts. So to be eligible, you basically need to have full GMC registration. So you need to have finished your PLAB 1, finish your PLAB 2, and also you need to have 1 year of internship experience so you can get full registration. Now, all non-training F2 posts require full registration. So basically, you can't apply for the post that I applied to if you have not done a year of your internship. Now, there are some non-training F1 posts on um, the websites, but they are they aren't that many, but they're definitely there. So within the time I was looking for jobs, I definitely saw quite a few of them, but not as many as the F2 non-training posts that I saw. The next question would be, where would you apply for these jobs? So there are two websites basically, nhsjobs.com, and there's also the NHS Scotland jobs for jobs in Scotland. And there's also a third website called Track Jobs. So Track Jobs and NHS Jobs are basically the same, but so for example, to look for these jobs and to apply for these jobs, you need to go on NHS Jobs, you need to create a profile, and that profile will basically be your CV, and then you will look for adverts that are for F2 non-training posts, and then you will apply for them. And you can so while I was applying for non-training posts, I needed something to do, so I made a blog that called imgdaybyday.com that sort of goes through basically everything I've talked about here so far and goes through applying for non-training posts and things like that. So if that, I think it's also better to have sometimes a visual component as to how to apply for these jobs and what kind of um, things that you need to do to get to apply for these jobs. So you can go to that website and that will tell you how to do that. But basically, for non-training jobs, you apply using two main websites: nhsjobs.com, NHS Scotland for jobs in Scotland, and Track Jobs. So you can use any of those to apply for these non-training positions. So far, I've kind of talked about training and non-training jobs, and they have seemed fairly similar, but I think it's important to know that there are certain differences, and some of those differences might put you off from applying for them and choosing one over the other. So I'm going to go through the differences based on my personal opinion as to what are the biggest differences and what is something that I certainly thought about before deciding which one I wanted to do, because, for full disclosure, like I applied for the F2 standalone program and I got an F2 standalone post, but I decided to take my non-training job because it started earlier than my F2 standalone post. So what are the biggest differences between these two? So, for training jobs, the number one thing I would say, the number one advantage for them is that at the end of your 12 months, you will have a certificate that says, the FPCC certificate that I mentioned earlier, that says you are ready for entering specialty training. As long as you pass the assessments that you have during and it's not like there's an exam during that year. It's just meeting with your supervisors and stuff. So as long as they are satisfied with your progress, you will get a certificate you'll automatically get a certificate at the end of your F2 year that tells you, this individual is ready to enter specialty training. So that's the number one advantage I would say of a training job, that you automatically get the certificate. Now that's not true in non-training jobs. So at the end of my 1 year as a non-training F2, I will not automatically be getting that foundation program certificate of completion, the FPCC certificate. I have to get a different signed form signed called the Certificate for Readiness to Enter Specialty Training, the CREST form. And I don't automatically get this, right? I have to do my own work, and I have to ensure that to get this CREST form signed, you need to do a bunch of things, and the onus is basically completely on me to get those done, within the 1 year. So whereas in a F2 standalone program, I would automatically get that at the end of my F2 year. In a non-training F2 year, I will need to go and get this CREST form signed so that I can, and that responsibility is completely on me to get that signed so that I can say that, I'm ready to enter specialty training. And to get that form signed, you get it from whatever consultants that you are working with for that year. So that's the first major difference, where in an F2 standalone program, training program, you get the certificate automatically, whereas a non-training F2 year, you kind of have to take it upon yourself to get this form signed. So the second big thing between training and non-training jobs, in my opinion, is that training jobs always start in August. So the F2 standalone program basically starts in August every year, whereas non-training jobs are advertised all year around. So I think for me, that was a big thing because I got my GMC registration in November, and I didn't want to wait till August of next year to start working. I wanted to work before that. So I think depending on, if you're willing to, depending on when you get your registration, and because you can't start work before you get your registration, depending on when you get your registration, you might, so for example, if I'd got my registration in July or something and I was starting my F2 in August, that would have been fine because I uh, basically had just gotten registration and the wait is only a couple of months. But because, I would have had to wait roughly 8 months before starting work, I decided I would be fine with working in a non-training position. So the number two thing, I guess, the biggest difference between the two is non-training positions are advertised all year round and you can start in any month of the year, whereas F2 training posts only start in August. So the third thing for me, and this is obviously again my personal opinion, is that so as I mentioned before, F2 standalone posts are 3 rotations for 4 months each, and you you can't and you can control as to what rotations you get based on your ranking. But for example, if you have a ranking that isn't, you know, fairly high up there, you might end up with rotations that you don't really want to do. So one of the rotations that I ended up with was, I think, a GP rotation, and I really didn't want to do that because I had no interest in being a GP. So in a training post, sometimes it's not possible to get the same post. It's not always possible that you will get exactly what you want because it's based on ranking and based on what your ranking is, based on what your preferences are. But in a non-training post, you basically apply for what you want, right? So you have a sense of control as to what you want, and then you will be doing that for um, the year. But I think even with training posts, even if you're doing 3 different things for a year, I think that can also be an advantage because you get some variety. And if you're someone who hasn't decided what they want to do, it can be an advantage doing 3 different things for a year. But personally, for me, I didn't mind doing different things, but I just wanted them to be in something that I was interested in. And the next thing is honestly probably one of the bigger things as well. Um, in terms of if you take a F2 standalone post or if you take a non-training F2 post, is that the time you spend in your non-training post might affect your future application. So and this only happens in specific instances. So let me just recap what I said before. So we said that to apply for uh, internal medicine training or surgical training and things like that, you needed 24 months of clinical experience and you needed that certificate signed off. Now, some training programs, so one of the training programs that I want to apply for called the Acute Care Common STEM program, um, they state that you are ineligible to apply for the program if you have 18 months of clinical experience within internal medicine. So if you have more than those 18 months, then you are deemed overqualified and you can't apply for this ACCS training program. So basically, if I stay in my non-training post for too long and I go over that threshold where they deem me overqualified, in this case 18 months, then I won't be able to apply for that program. Now, if you do your F2 standalone posts, the time you spend in specialties there, that doesn't count towards this 18 months limit that's there. It only counts non-training, um, the amount you spend in non-training posts. It doesn't count the time you spend in the foundation program. So that's the big thing. One of the big things is that, you don't want to be overqualified for whatever training program, whether that be core surgical training or core or ACCS training, the one that I want to apply for. Um, if you do the F2 standalone, the months you spend those in the months you spend within that 1 year, that doesn't count towards the 18 months. That doesn't count towards you being overqualified, but the time that I'll be spending within for the next year. So for me, that time counts because it's in a non-training post. So the third big thing would be you want to make when you're considering whether you want a training program or a non-training program to make sure that whatever you want to do later on, the amount of time you spend in your non-training program, it doesn't make you overqualified. And this overqualification thing is not something that's there for all training programs. So, for example, internal medicine training, it doesn't have any such rule that if you have spent 18 months, you're overqualified and you can't apply. Internal medicine doesn't have that. Only certain training programs have that, and one of them is the one that I want to apply to called the Acute Care Common STEM program. But internal medicine training doesn't have it. I think core surgical training has it. So if you want to become a surgeon, um, you don't want to spend you don't want to become overqualified by spending too long in a non-training program. And all of these details as to which specialties have these overqualification rules, you can find that within the websites of all of them. I just know the one I want to apply to because naturally I'm curious. I'm going to find out more about that. But the third big thing is basically that the time you spend within your training post, your F2 training post, that doesn't count towards this overqualification thing, whereas the time you spend in non-training posts does count towards the overqualification um, criteria. And the last thing I guess I could mention as a difference between the two would be if you're an F2 trainee, you get dedicated um, time off and teaching time within the week. So within a week, you'd have maybe, Friday morning, you'll have F2 training. So during that time, you don't have to show up to you don't have your clinical responsibilities during that time when you are um, going for those training, when you have your teaching, basically. So when you have F2 teaching, you are excused from your clinical responsibilities. Whereas in a non-training post, so in some places you'll be allowed to go as well as a non-trainee, but in some you don't. So it really depends on whatever trust you end up being in. So I think I've gone through like the major differences between the two programs, and I guess you could have a fair question of there's so many differences. What do I apply for? Training, non-training position, and honestly, I think it's more of a personal choice, and there are lots of things to consider. As I mentioned before, I applied for non-training jobs from November 2019 and got a job in around February 2020. and during that time, I also got a F2 standalone post. But because I didn't want to wait for such a long time to start working again, I decided to take the non-training post, and so that I could start earlier as opposed to waiting for August, or waiting for like 8 months before I started my job. Um, so what position you apply for really depends on your own personal circumstances. So like I think the first thing you would consider is when you get your full GMC registration. And, as I said, I got mine in November 2019, and I wanted to get back in clinical practice as soon as possible, as opposed to waiting till August of next year. But if you get your GMC registration, in June or in Feb or March, I think it's a lot more palatable to wait for just a few months before starting. But I didn't want to wait, for 8 months. But I think if I had gotten GMC registration, say in April, May, or in, even in March, I would have probably just waited for the F2 standalone post. So the first thing, you have to consider is when you get your registration. Second thing you obviously have to consider, as I mentioned before, is the getting your CREST form signed, so the certificate to enter specialty training form signed. In a non-training position, the onus will be on you to get that form signed. It will be your responsibility that you meet all of the criteria. Whereas in an F2 standalone post, as long as you pass, as long as your supervisors deem that you are competent enough, you will get that automatically. So you don't have to get this form signed. It'll just be something that you will automatically have as long as you make it through the F2 standalone program, which, I wouldn't have any doubt someone, not making it through that. Um, and the next thing you have to consider is the rotations in F2 standalone, which I mentioned. So, if you definitely know what you want to do and you would rather just spend a year doing that before entering a training program in that. So, for example, if you spend a year doing surgery, or in my case, spend a year doing some medical specialties, and then starting in a training program in those medical specialties. In a non-training post, you can pick exactly what you want. In a training post, it really depends on your ranking and things like that. Um, and the last thing, as I mentioned before, is just making sure you're not overqualified for core training programs if you start in a non-training job. So in a non-training job, the time you spend in a non-training job will count towards the overqualification. Whereas in F2 standalone, whatever time you spend in the specialties, that will not count within being overqualified. So I guess I'll sort of just give, because I haven't seen a lot of this information around, is give my own experience as starting in a non-training post, as someone who, one, had never worked in the NHS before, and two, was coming from a medical system that was fairly different to working in the NHS. In my own experience, I think you know your experience in a non-training post can really depend on whatever trust you're in. I've heard that some people have not had a great experience, but I can only give off what my experience was. And to be honest, I have no complaints about the way that the experience that I've had within my trust. I mentioned that I got a job in around February, and they were really understanding about me not being able to start on time because of COVID and things like that, and that setting it back a little bit. But so, for example, when I started, I had a month of shadowing, which was paid shadowing, just so I could get used to the system, get used to how things are done within the NHS, and I didn't go on call during that 1 month. So during that 1 month, I worked 9 to 5, and I was shadowing, so I didn't have any responsibilities per se. I would just follow the other doctors around and see how things were done and get used to the system. Um, I started like doing things and working during that time, but during that 1 month, you basically, I had good support from my trust where they gave me that 1 month to, because I was new to the NHS, to get used to the system. Now, that wouldn't be something you would get in an F2 standalone post. But you will, you can ask your trust in a non-training post whether you can have that month where you are shadowing and don't have, you know, on-call responsibility. So basically, I did 1 month of 9 to 5 before I went onto the rota and started doing evening shifts and night shifts. So I lucked out in that sense. Um, and also, the trust that I'm at, we have, your own non-training teaching, not trust grade teaching for non-training doctors. So there is teaching provided for us every week, as well. And also, I have access to the online e-portfolio that trainees also have access to. So that portfolio will help in me, collecting evidence for getting my CREST form signed. Um, and I also, have an educational supervisor a clinical supervisor that, I have access to, and I can go for guidance. And you obviously, for me, you as a non-trainee, you have the same pay, same responsibility, same number of hours as an F2 trainee, and the same amount of study leave. I also have like a study budget, which you should have as well as a non-trainee. So my own experience within my trust has been fairly good as a non-trainee, um, and as someone who's new to the NHS, because they gave me time for shadowing, um, and they gave me a whole month, which is quite a lot, um, so that I could get used to, because you have to get used to a lot of different things. The equipment, you have to get used to prescribing, all of that is very different. Um, so it was nice that I had that 1 month to get used to it, to the way the ward that I work in works. And also, having a study budget so that I can do, whatever study courses that I want to do. For example, I want to do advanced life support, so that will come out of my study budget. Um, and I think part of the reason I've had a good experience is because the trust I work at has a lot of international medical graduates who come work for them in these non-training posts. So they have that experience as to supporting these doctors within these non-training posts. And I mentioned that I would need to get my CREST competencies signed off, and there's a point of contact within my trust so that we can work towards doing that. So I think I've had a fairly good experience within the non-training post that I am in. Um, and I've heard some people have not had the best experience, but obviously I can only really tell as to what my experience has been while I've been working over here. And just one last thing that I wanted to mention in terms of applying for these non-training posts. Um, so in my experience, it was easier getting an F2 standalone post than getting a non-training post. I did lots of non-training post applications. I would say more around 50 to 60, and I ended up getting 4 to 5 interviews, and um, I declined a couple of interviews as well. And all the interviews that I ended up getting that job, but I chose the one that I currently am in. Um, but it can take a few months, I would say 2 to 3 months on average, after you get your registration to start getting interviews and calls for non-training posts. And it was basically during this time that I set up my blog, imgdaybyday.com, to sort of give um, RCSI Bahrain graduates and other people a sense of what it is like to apply for UK medical training in 2020. And um, I think that covers most of the things that I wanted to talk about. I think one thing that you could ask is, what do they look for in these, um, you know, in these non-training posts? What do people like? What determines if you get a job or don't get a job? And honestly, I think you just, as someone applying for their first non-training job in the NHS, you sort of just apply for as many jobs as you can, and you try and make your applications and tailor your personal statement to the job that you're applying for. I don't know what specifically stood out about my application in the for the interviews that I got and why they selected me. I honestly am not sure about that because I didn't do anything that was too different. A lot of these non-training jobs will look for people that have NHS experience. I obviously didn't have that, but I think in terms of what employers look for within your non-training application, I think it's more just applying for. You just have to apply for lots of jobs, and then it's more of a numbers game as opposed to being something specific within your application. Obviously, that doesn't mean you don't pay attention to your application. You obviously have to make sure your personal statement is right. You fill out all the different types, all the different parts of the application form, and things like that. But in terms of, just to go back to the amount of support I received as my first job in the NHS, I honestly think I have zero complaints about the support I got. Mainly being one, I my trust was really understanding about my job starting a little late because of COVID. Two, I got 1 month of shadowing where I had would just shadow doctors from 9 to 5 and just get used to what the system was and how it works. And you kind of need that time, or at least I felt that I needed that time because I had spent a couple of years out of clinical practice, and two, I it's just a completely different way of working. You um, not completely different way of working. You just have to get used to different things, like making referrals, call, and how and things like that. Things that are more administrative than clinical per se. But even there are some clinical things. You have to get used to all the different clinical equipment. But honestly, usually you'll have people that help you out, and having that that 1 month of shadowing really helped me. So I think I was well supported that I have that month of shadowing. I also have, dedicated teaching every week, and you get your own study budget, your study leave, and there's no difference between you or the trainees in what's expected of you and what responsibilities you have, what duties you have. So, I think starting your first job in a non-training post can be challenging, but I think having that support from the trust is really good. And especially I think not going having that month of shadowing where I don't go, I'm not starting off with a night shift and having no idea of, what I'm supposed to be doing. Like for me, I could spend that month of shadowing, get used to the system. So, when I went on the rota and started doing evening and night shifts, I was used to the kind of work that I was doing. So I guess the last thing I'll mention is just if you want, and I know this recording is fairly wrong already, but if you want to know more about how applying for non-training posts, what the application process is like, or applying for training posts and what that application process is like, you can go to the blog that I run called, if you Google search imgdaybyday.com, it will go there, and it takes you through doing your PLAB 1, PLAB 2, GMC registration, the applying for jobs part, and also gives tips on applying for jobs for non-training programs. And also there's a page specifically for RCSI Bahrain graduates that takes you through a lot of what I've talked about. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Raja Tiwari ST. So it's at RAJATIWARY ST.